We begin today with the news. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said Tuesday it will greenlight the final phase of construction for the Dakota Access Pipeline. Let's break down some of the major court decisions and struggles of the indigenous water protectors against the $3.8 billion project. On April 1st, 2016, a group of 200 Native Americans rode on horseback to protest the pipeline's location. This was the first protest of many, and over the summer, their crowd grew. On September 3rd, private security guards hired by Energy Transfer Partners used attack dogs and mace against protesters at the pipeline site. In October, on one day alone, the 27th, about 140 protesters are arrested after a large clash with police. Protesters light fire to hay bales and attempt to sabotage construction equipment as police and riot gear use pepper spray and fire beanbags on them. Police ramped up their response on November 20th, 2016, firing water cannons on protesters and shooting them with rubber bullets. In December, the Army Corps of Engineers denied an easement allowing the pipeline to cross Lake Oahe, effectively halting work on the pipeline. That was all reversed at the end of January when President Donald Trump signed an executive order to grant construction of the pipeline, along with the controversial Keystone XL. Now this week, the Army Corps granted an easement which will allow Energy Transfer Partners to drill under Lake Oahe on the Missouri River. The Corps also said it was to suspend a 14-day waiting period. That means the company could immediately begin boring a tunnel for the final 1.5 miles of the line. For more, I spoke earlier with Tangerine Boland. She's the executive director of Revolution Truth. She told me first here on RT about her organization's plan to launch a legal challenge to the pipeline.
We are going to file a case to stop this pipeline on these treaty lands. We're going to court possibly as early as next week, but definitely within the next month. And we're representing plaintiffs from multiple tribes that are directly impacted by this pipeline. So a lot of exciting things at hand. And we're one of the only groups left standing in between Standing Rock and the DAPL pipeline being completed under Lake Oahe.
And what is the specific legal challenge you're bringing with this case?
Well, first of all, there's something kind of odd at the moment. You just mentioned the Army Corps reversing its decision on the granting of the easement. They gave the public a public comment period, which they've just arbitrarily suspended. That's not okay. That goes against administrative rules. We're looking into that. We may file a stay against the fact that they just arbitrarily suspended this public comment period, which is critical. The public needs to be able to weigh in on these things. That is what democracy looks like. And then secondly, the much bigger case is a case grounded in environmental justice and racial discrimination. This Standing Rock incident, everything that has happened on and around Standing Rock to these tribes and the water protectors that have been desperately trying to protect their sole water source and their sacred lands, is the most egregious example of civil liberties and human rights and other kinds, myriad abuses that we have probably yet seen on U.S. soil or seen in quite some time. It's really hard to compare it to anything. There isn't really another incident or case that encompasses the span of abuses and transgressions that we have seen on so many different fronts. It's horrifying.
And what do you hope the impact of this case will be, especially in light of Trump's executive order and this easement being granted?
Well, okay, so the Army Corps, they don't have the permit yet. They can't start construction until they actually have the permit in hand. The executive order is just an executive order. It's the president signing something. It's not law. It's not settled law. It's not precedent. We can certainly fight that. Though Trump might wish to believe that executive orders are law and that he lays the law of the land, he in fact does not. We do still have a democracy. We do still have checks and balances, and we will challenge this. And one thing I want to say about this case, it needs to be stopped. It's such a clear example of environmental injustice and racial discrimination. It's kind of shocking that the case hasn't been brought forward earlier, but here we are, and our plaintiffs are ready to go, and they're ready to say no to Trump and ready to say no to the Army Corps and their arbitrary decision this week.
Well, speaking yesterday to reporters, Trump said he has received 0 phone calls complaining about his actions with regard to the pipeline, declaring, quote, "I don't even think it's controversial." Your response to the president?
That's absolutely absurd, as are unfortunately a good many things he has been coming up with of late. You know, I don't have a beef with Trump supporters per se. I think this country has been struggling with adhering to actual democratic principles for some time. I think we've sold millions of people in this country down the river. I think both Republicans and Democrats have done that. That said, this is not an example of leadership, and it's certainly not an example of democratic governance or democratic behavior. It's not an adherence to the kind of principles that we're founded upon and we expect to adhere to. So, and Standing Rock is such an egregious example of a departure from those principles on every front. And so there really isn't, you know, I know the world has moved on from Standing Rock as far as the media is concerned, and so thank you so much for still being here, because these are our indigenous peoples. These people have been through hundreds of years of trauma and assault at the hands of the United States government, and this company, this $25 billion company, expected to just waltz right in and essentially destroy sacred tribal lands and put in grave danger the sole water source for a good number of tribes and up to 20 million people downstream.
We have about 30 seconds left, Tangerine, but I just wanted to ask you to give us a brief update on the situation on the ground right now. I know some of those camps were being cleared last week.
They are. There is an increased police presence, and they are attempting to sweep the camps and shut, you know, they're basically going into people's teepees and taking away the wood-burning stoves so they can't survive the winter. I think the camps may be coming to an end, but the battle is not over. It's going to the courts.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that next step in the battle with us today, Executive Director of Revolution Truth, Tangerine Bolin.